Jason Hehir, I, like millions of people, have to thank you for giving us some much needed sports content this spring with The Last Dance. So I want to know, what have you been watching in quarantine that's brought you the same level of comfort or nostalgia as The Last Dance has done for us?
Well, like the rest of the world, I watched Hamilton the other night. My girlfriend and I had seen it a couple of 4th of Julys ago, actually. So we watched that just to kind of relive that experience again. The beginning of the pandemic, we watched Escape at Dannemora. I was still working really night and day on The Last Dance when the pandemic began. So there wasn't a lot of binging going. I was binging my own rough cuts at that point. But since then, she has never seen Breaking Bad. I watched it when it aired, so I'm reliving that now. A lot of 80s movies, just a lot of comfort films, a lot of we're kind of trading movie nights and our favorite movies that the other one hasn't seen. Just trying to keep up with, trying to watch as much news as I possibly can before it drives me insane, but I still feel informed. Just like the rest of the world, really trying to get by day to day.
Yeah. Well, I can't believe she's never seen Breaking Bad, because I rewatched it twice after El Camino last year. So yeah, maybe I shouldn't admit that publicly. But I know Mike Tollin got Michael Jordan's approval to use the footage first. So when and how did you come on board to direct?
Mike Tollin had that meeting with Michael and his people early in 2016. And in July of 2016, Mike Tollin, that is, approached me, told me about the existence of this footage, which had been kind of an urban legend in sports production circles for 2 decades. And he told me about it, said that Michael had given his approval and that they were going to move forward with what was then an 8-part series. Didn't have a partner yet. ESPN, Netflix, Amazon, Hulu, HBO, everyone was being mentioned as potential partners, but they were trying to hammer out the deal between the production company and the NBA and the Jordan brand, and then get to the next step of finding a director and a crew. So that's where I came on board. And he told me about it, and I kind of went into a bunker for 2 or 3 weeks and studied all things Michael Jordan and 80s and 90s and Bulls. And a lot of that stuff, I've been studying since I was 8 years old, because Michael came into the league in 84 and I turned 8 in 84. And my knowledge and fandom of basketball and of popular culture, music, hip hop, so on, kind of parallels Michael's rise in the NBA from 84 to 98. So I was in 3rd grade in 84 when he came in, and in 98 I graduated college, and that's when Michael finished his run with the Bulls. So I had already done a lot of the research. It was more like reacclimating myself to a lot of the books I had already read, and I came up with a 14-page outline that I gave to Mike and then shared with the NBA and shared with Michael's representatives. And I had already known some people at ESPN and Netflix, so things very slowly fell into place from there. Actually, it took them so long to dot the I's and cross the T's that I went off and did another doc for HBO called Andre the Giant. And when we finished Andre the Giant, that's when they had finally signed their paperwork and they were ready to officially begin production. So we went seamlessly right from Andre into the Bulls doc.
Wow. Well, the series covers the Bulls dynasty through the lens of the 97-98 season, but you're also showcasing all these different vital figures, obviously led by MJ. But there's 2 different timelines. So how did you go about arcing out all the episodes, going through all that footage, and then, having them converge in the last episode of the 98 finals?
We knew that we were going to have converging timelines all along, because if we told the story chronologically, we would have had to start it really when Michael came into the league in 84. And the whole point of the series, it was called The Last Dance before I even came on board. It's been called The Last Dance since they were discussing the project in the early 2000s. The whole point of the series was to showcase that unseen footage from the 97-98 season. So that had to be the marquee attraction, was the 97-98 season. But obviously, if you have that kind of access to Michael and Phil Jackson and to Scottie Pippen and Dennis Rodman and so on, you don't want to limit yourself to just one season, because there's so much story to be told. So we knew we had to kind of figure out a way to tell the backstory and to tell the 97-98 season story at the same time. Chad Beck, who's our lead editor, who's brilliant, was a major force in really hammering home to me that the timeline should be chronologically converging. Because the original outline that I just mentioned, I was all over the place. It was whenever something popped up, if it was the All-Star game in episode 5, say when, the Kobe Bryant episode, we would go back to Kobe being young and the supposed freeze-out game in '85 when Michael was a rookie and Isaiah supposedly freezed him out. It was really chronologically all over the place. So I knew all the pieces that went into this puzzle. I just hadn't figured out exactly how to put them into the puzzle correctly so that the audience could follow along as well as we could, because we're experts in it because we've been studying it every day. So Chad, Beck, and my producer Jake Rogow, they were the ones who really kind of spearheaded the effort to make those timelines converge. So when we got to episode 10, both timelines were in Utah for the '98 finals.
Mm-hmm. Well, you referenced before you were finishing up the documentary in quarantine. So it was like editing everything, the last couple episodes in separate places all over the country, I'm assuming.
It was resourceful. And I say that, on behalf of our team. This is the most effort I've put into hiring because there were so many specific roles that had to be filled, and the jobs that had to be done very, very quickly. I've said before that normally an hour-long archival doc will take me about a year from the inception of the idea to all the research, to the shooting, to the editing, to notes and rough cuts and final cuts and color correction, finishing. It's about a year. And so we did 10 hours in 2 years. So we were working already at quintuple the rate. And then when the pandemic hit, we lost our infrastructure. We lost the building that we had been working on it for 2 years. We lost the ability to sit in the same room with each other and kind of bounce ideas off of each other. And that's when the epiphanies occur that make or break a project like this, is that you're working late or you go on a walk after lunch and someone has an idea and you run back to the edit room and you get to try it. That's really what the joy is in the project for a lot of us, is coming together and seeing those ideas that are in your head actually pop out on the screen. So we lost that privilege to work with each other. But we have brilliant people on our staff. We have a very lean staff. It's about 10 people, but we just about as seamlessly as possible went from multi-million-dollar facilities to our own apartments. And very quickly we had to make up a new workflow, whereas one editor wasn't taking care of most of an episode. It was I would have to assign, minutes 6 through 11. Chad, you have this one. Minutes 12 through 16. I'll take that. Minutes 17 through 22. Another editor's going to take that. And we were really kind of piecemealing these things together. So I was signing off on things that were way out of order chronologically, but we just had to kind of put blindfolds on and put the puzzle together with a blindfold on. It was certainly challenging, but in a way it brought us even closer than we already were, because we were all relying on each other so much. But the irony was that we could only be in the same room, quote unquote, on a Zoom call or through a text thread or email chain. So that made it difficult, but it was April and May are kind of a blur.
I think that's true for a lot of us too. So yeah. Well, it's so easy to slobber over, Jordan's greatness, but the show does show him in less than flattering light frequently, from his gambling to him being apolitical, which carries a whole new light now, and then to him being a hard ass to his teammates. So did you get any pushback from anyone, like, execs or even Jordan himself, for trying to ground and humanize this mythical figure by highlighting some of his faults?
At the very, very beginning, I think that it was expected from some of the executives involved on the NBA side and on the Jordan brand side that we were really just going to focus on 97, 98. This was not the quote-unquote definitive Michael Jordan story. It still isn't, because we told so many other stories that you wouldn't tell in a Michael Jordan documentary. You wouldn't interview Steve Kerr's mom for a quote-unquote Michael Jordan documentary. But that dissipated very quickly. I think when they became comfortable with the level of research that we were putting into it, the level of responsibility that we tried to exude in telling this story the right way, how privileged we felt to actually be the ones to be able to put this thing down, quote unquote, on paper or on a screen for generation now to watch it and for future generations to watch this. We all just felt incredibly lucky, and we wanted to tell, there's a good side and a bad side to everybody. There's the nice side and the mean side to everybody. And we wanted to be able to tell as comprehensive a story as possible. And I think that once all the partners and I started working together more and more, everyone became more comfortable with telling, a more well-rounded story. So there's a lot of places that at the very outset of this, the first couple of months of this project back in 2016, I never would have thought we would go with the Republicans Buy Sneakers Too story, or even some of the harsher footage from that 97-98 season. Michael himself never gave 1 ounce of pushback. I remember we interviewed him 3 times, and for the second interview, a lot of times I would have to provide topics for interview subjects, not because they were sensitive, but because so many of these stats, these guys have played thousands of games in their lives. I'd have to say, hey, we're going to ask you about the 96 finals when you guys won in 6 games, just to remind them of what the circumstances were. Michael never looked at any of those note pages or cheat sheets. He told me before the second interview, you can send those all you want. I'm never gonna look at them. Just ask me what you want, I'll answer you honestly. He never once mentioned anything he didn't want to talk about. He never once dodged a question. He never, if anything, it was quite the opposite. Thankfully for us, because he came in and it seemed like he wanted to talk. We wanted to discuss these things, and he played along. I mean, this is a competitive guy who's got good relationships with a lot of these fellow legends. So when he's laughing at Gary Payton and doing all that, it would have been very easy for him to just kind of like snicker and shrug and say next question. He's playing along, and his participation, I think, is what made this doc into something more than I thought it was going to be.
Mm-hmm. Well, the ending of the 7th episode was very intense when you ask him, do you think his like ferocious competitive appetite came at the cost of him being thought as a nice guy, and all his teammates, like BJ Armstrong was he a nice guy? He couldn't be, like he just, rode his teammates really hard and roasted Scott Burrell, which was actually kind of funny. But like when he just went into this lengthy answer, and it kind of, I think for a lot of viewers, like escalated kind of quickly, and he calls for a break, and that's the end of the episode. So what was it like for you watching him answer that? Were you expecting him to be as candid as he was? Because he talks about like winning comes at a price. Yeah.
Not at all. And that line of questioning evolved organically, because that was only 45 minutes into our first interview. And we interviewed him 3 times, like I said, for 8 total hours. So 45 minutes in, he's getting really passionate and choking up, and I can see a tear coming out of his eye, and he's got that huge 1.5 long forefinger that he's holding out like this. And I think myself and the crew were just we're stunned. And that's a point where you just get out of the way and let the subject finish whatever thought they're trying to get out, or whatever this is. Try and finish their own way of how they want to say this. I forget what the exact line of questioning was, but it did turn into, you're not known as the nicest guy. Does that bother you? Because in my experience up to that point, I'd only met him a handful of times, and briefly at that. But he was always very nice, not just to me, but even more telling to the people around him, to strangers, when there were no cameras around. And that's, we've all dealt with people who are in the spotlight. When there's no cameras around, their true self comes out, and sometimes it's disappointing. That was not the case with him. This was the polite Wilmington country boy, Michael Jordan. This was not like swagger MJ from the 90s. This is the guy who came in and was just very respectful and polite to everyone. So it genuinely, I was curious genuinely as to whether or not he kind of bristled at the notion that's not the thing that's top of mind when people discuss him, is whether it's that he's a nice guy and a competitor. No, he's a competitor. He's maybe the most prolific winner, post Bill Russell of our generation. So I wondered, just in the course of the conversation, how he felt about that. And that's where that came from. But it was we were still very much just kind of like trying to get into a rhythm and trying to get him comfortable with being interviewed. So that was really a turning point in the entire project. It was the turning point in the project, because he asked for a break. He didn't get up. And a lot of people said he takes his earpiece out. There was no ear. He never had anything in his ear. I think he was like a nervous tick. He was just like itching his ear and said, I don't want to do this anymore. Like, give me a minute. I got up and left because I didn't know. I'm not going to sit there and take a break and just stare at him for however long he needs to compose himself. And there was a bathroom in this mansion we were interviewing him. There was a bathroom right behind the cameras and the lights, and I had nowhere else to go but there, because the equipment was blocking wherever else I could go. And I remember just standing in that bathroom, just pacing around, bigger than any apartment I've ever had in New York. This bathroom in this mansion, and looking in the mirror and thinking like, whoa, that's a moment. Like, how are we going to build to that? This affects the trajectory of the entire series now, because that's one of those tentpoles that you build to. So it was stunning in the best possible way.
Mm-hmm. Well, speaking of moments, you also gave birth to a lot of memes, especially him laughing at iPads. So when you saw him like, laughing at Isaiah or Gary when it was happening? Were you thinking like, oh, the internet's gonna eat this up?
No, not at all. I mean, it was manna from heaven for a filmmaker to know that you have that on camera and that he's actually, like I said before, that he's playing along, because he could have just rolled his eyes and given me the iPad back and said next question, which would have been telling as well. But in the moment when and that caused us to utilize that method a little bit more when it was working. Then the next time we came back for an interview to show it to him again, and there's a lot of stuff that didn't make it. There's a lot of clips that we showed him that didn't really land. But that was maybe the most fun surprise for all of us in the crew, was watching on Sunday nights and seeing what resonated with the audience. And we never thought that it would be as widely received or as widely watched as it was. And obviously the circumstances were such that there was nothing else on. Programming, and all eyes were on us. But we never thought like, oh, this is going to be a meme, or the internet's going to have fun with this. This former Chicago resident was a graphic, a lower third that we had been looking at for a year and a half at that point. We had been cutting episode 1 and 2 since like September 2018. So a lot of these were just kind of second nature to us. And so to view it through the eyes of people seeing it for the first time was really, really fun. That's the most fun part of those Sunday nights.
Mm-hmm. Well, one of my favorite parts of the show is the music. Like, I love a good sports montage in general, but I'm a 90s kid, so those needle drops took me back. And they were mostly hip hop, which was perfect because, the 80s and 90s saw the rise of the Bulls and hip hop. So can you talk about how you went about selecting the music for all these very specific moments? Because they matched up really well to just marrying like the visual to the music.
Yeah, that was really my own hip hop nerdery. That was not off the top of my head, but that's the part of each doc that I look forward to the most, is the music, both the score and the needle drops. So we had a real great opportunity here to kind of chart the rise of Michael Jordan and the Bulls from 84 to 98, from niche attraction to global phenomenon, and to do the exact same thing with the rise of hip hop from 84 to 98. So I just thought back to what I was listening to in a car with my friends in 92 was Black Sheep, and 93 was Naughty by Nature. What I was listening to with my brothers when we had our first boombox in our house in 84 or 85 was Eric and Rakim. So to match those up. And also it was really fun because back then, especially in the 80s, you didn't hear hip hop a lot on mainstream television. I don't remember watching any rap videos until Yo MTV Raps came out on MTV. It was BET. You would have to go to BET and watch Video Vibrations or Video Soul, one of those shows, to see your favorite rap musicians in the flesh. I remember waking my brother up in the morning. Houdini Freaks Come Out at Night video was on, and I woke my brother up at like 8 in the morning, shaking my head to come down and see what these guys look like. Like, there they are. So to go back to that feeling was so much fun. And back then, like, NBA Superstars was the NBA Entertainment videotape that came with like a Sports Illustrated subscription, and the Superstars had their own song. There was no hip hop on that except Hakeem Olajuwon had How You Like Me Now, which we actually use in the series. But Michael's song was Take My Breath Away from Top Gun. So that's the kind of music that you were hearing attached to these highlights of his. So it was so fun to kind of go back retroactively and correct this music into what I thought it should have been era-specific hip hop. So to do, for instance, I'm Bad during his 63-point performance, that made a lot more sense to me than the theme to an action movie starring.
Yeah, like a power ballad. Yeah. And also Run DMC for his double nickel game was perfect too. Yeah. Well, I know you've said that Michael doesn't want to be looked at as a statue, and like in his mind, he's still at his peak. But do you also think he wanted to do this series because, like you said, it started in 2016 when he signed on? Like, that was when the Warriors were starting to dominate, coached by Steve Kerr, and LeBron, led the Cavs to a win. There's the endless LeBron debate. So do you think he also wanted to remind people like, hey, I'm still the GOAT here?
I think that would be coming from a place of insecurity for him, and he's not an insecure guy at all. That's not anything that he ever exuded. We never once discussed LeBron or the Warriors or anything like that. It was. I never got the sense that this was about protecting his legacy. Now, we know how competitive he is. We knew before the series. I certainly have a better idea that after interviewing him and portraying that in the series. So he must have been thinking about it. That must have crossed his mind that, oh, this will be a nice reminder. I think it had more to do with the fact that he's got, you know, a new family. He's got twin girls who at the time were 3 or 4 when we set out on this. I think that a lot of it was about legacy rather than competing with the present guys and reminding people. I think he comes from a place of such security and confidence in his abilities and what he performed and what he accomplished, that he's not trying to compete with the kids who play today or the men who play today. But I do think that he probably considered his legacy. I think it's tough for him. He doesn't see himself. He told Wright Thompson one time, the writer, that he didn't see himself living beyond 50 years old. And we discussed that for a while. It didn't make it into the piece because we were discussing, he had just become a grandfather. The 2 days before we interviewed him that second time in that maroon shirt is when his grandson was born. And I said, "You don't look like a grandpa." And he said, "I don't feel like one." There's a story I told before that Jasmine, his daughter, I was interviewing her, and I said, "What is your son, what's he going to call Michael?" And she said, "I don't know." I asked him, I said, "Dad, do you want to be called Grandpa, Papa, Pops?" And he said, "Just have him call me Michael." And she said, "Dad, he's not going to call me Michael." But Michael's obviously joking when he says that, but I think part of him bristles at the notion of, you know, immortality, because that means that your story is told. So a definitive documentary, no, doesn't want that to be done. The first time I met him, he said, "You do the definitive MJ doc when I'm 6 feet under in a pine box," and then he told me. But his number being retired when he was still off playing baseball, I don't think that he was too thrilled with that ceremony. The same with the statue. He asked, BJ Armstrong told me that he asked him, when he was about to be inducted into the Hall of Fame, he called BJ and asked him what the rules are for induction. And the rule BJ told him was 5 years after you play your last play in the NBA is when you're eligible for induction into the Hall of Fame. So Michael said, "Okay, so theoretically I could just check in for one play and that would get me 5 more years." I don't think he wants to be seen as being in the past. So,
yeah.
But he also is a guy, I think, who's proud of his accomplishments, and lucky for me, chose this to be the time that he wanted to tell those stories.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't think he'll ever be looked at as a relic. So he doesn't need to worry about that. No. Well, Jason, congratulations on the series. It was great. Thanks once again for giving us, 2 months of entertainment. And it was great speaking with you. Thank you so much. Stay safe. Wear a mask.
You too. Wear a mask. Stay safe. And thanks so much for having me. I enjoyed it.
Thank you.